Poštovana doktorice Reisman, dobrodošli u Hrvatski sabor. Na ovu današnju sjednicu na temu uvođenja spolnog odgoja i iskustva iz Sjedinjenih Američkih Država i Velike Britanije. Dobrodošli su želim i gospodinu Timotheu Tateu, novinaru i redatelju koji je evo došao u vašoj pratnji, i naravno organizatorima vašeg dolaska u Hrvatsku, gospodi Vici Batarelu iz udruge Vigilare, te Stjepi Bartulici, koji našoj široj javnosti poznat kao povjerenik predsjednika Republike, ali je danas ovdje s nama u svojstvu predsjednika Centra za obnovu kulture. Pozdravljam sve kolegice i kolege zastupnike, vanjske članovi, članice saborskih odbora, sve goste i naravno sve predstavnike medija. Današnja sjednica je prvenstveno jedna sjednica koja treba potaknuti dijalog između naše gošće i zastupnika u Hrvatskom saboru i članova vanjskih odbora koji su za ovim stolom. Stoga nije predviđena kao jedna preskonferencija, ali prijatelji iz medija su naravno pozvani da mogu pratiti tijek ove rasprave. Doktorice Reisman, prije nego što započnemo sjednicom, želim izraziti žaljenje zbog neutemeljenih napada koji ste ovih dana doživjeli. Naročito žalim što ste doživjeli lažnu optužbu za antisemitizam. Bili ste ovih dana izvrgnuti napadima jedne silne i zastrašujuće kampanje verbalnog nasilja i primitivizma. Toj su se kampanji, nažalost, pridružili čak i neki ljudi koji bi po funkciji trebali širiti akademske slobode umjesto netolerancije ili dogmatskih pogleda prema različitom mišljenju. No, doktorice Reisman, postoji i drugačija Hrvatska koja je doista tolerantna i napredna, koja možda se neće s vama složiti oko svega ili oko nekih vaših teza, ali koja će vas saslušati i raspravljati u duhu istinskog dijaloga i međusobnog uvažavanja. To je prava slika većinske Hrvatske. Vi ste, doktorice Reisman, govorili u Američkom kongresu. Nažalost, neki lažni liberali htjeli su zabraniti da govorite u Hrvatskom saboru. Nisu uspjeli i danas je pobijedila sloboda govora. Ova sjednica na početku je bila zamišljena kao jedan doprinos, kao jedan poticaj dijalogu o spolnom odgoju u školstvu i zato smo i pozvali ministra ili predstavnike Ministarstva znanosti, obrazovanja i sporta da evo u jednom ozračju pluralizma raspravimo i ovu temu. Međutim, nakon kampanje nasilja i primitivizma koju smo svjedočili ovih dana, vaš dolazak u Hrvatski sabor se pretvorio u nešto puno važnije od toga. Vaš dolazak u sabor pretvorio se u prvorazredno civilizacijsko pitanje poštivanja slobode govora. Ja ću se ovdje, doktorice Reisman, zaustaviti, zamoliti potpredsjednika Sabora, akademika, da nam se kratko obrati i kasnije zamoliti vas da započnete s vašim izlaganjem. Akademiče.
Hvala lijepo. Poštovana gospođo dr. Reisman, osobito mi je zadovoljstvo i čast pozdraviti vas ovdje u Hrvatskom saboru. Naglašavam da vas ne pozdravljam zbog nekih koji bi mogli tražiti, kako se hrvatski kaže, dlaku u jajetu u funkciji potpredsjednika Sabora u ime predsjedništva Sabora, nego u ime kluba zastupnika HDZ-a. Kao što je gospodin Stier rekao, nažalost imali ste prigode u ovih nekoliko dana suočiti se sa dva lica Hrvatske ili dvije Hrvatske. Jedna je ona koja zagovara slobodu mišljenja i govora. Hrvatska tolerancije, Hrvatska uvažavanja tuđih mišljenja i kad se s njima ne slažemo. Hrvatska u kojoj je poštivanje različitosti jedno od temeljnih vrijednosti, jedno od temeljnih ljudskih prava, u kojoj je odbacivanje dogmatizma i isključivosti nešto što se itekako mora cijeniti, koja je obilježena pluralizmom mišljenja i otvorenosti prema različitim stavovima, koja smatra da su obilježja osobnih sloboda držati se čvrsto svojih uvjerenja na temelju argumenata, ali i dopuštati da se i drugi drže čvrsto svojih uvjerenja. Hrvatska koja njeguje kulturu dijaloga i diskusije na temelju argumenata. Nažalost, ja sam, odmah da kažem, uvjeren da kao što ste jučer se suočili sa takvom Hrvatskom, primjerice na Medicinskom fakultetu, u jednoj akademskoj atmosferi, dostojanstvenoj atmosferi, ja sam uvjeren da ćete se sa istom takvom atmosferom susreti i ovdje u ovom visokom domu. Nažalost, žao mi je što ste se susreli i sa jednom drugom Hrvatskom koja je netolerantna, koja je isključiva, koja želi svoje poglede, svoje svjetonazore nametnuti drugima i onda ako pomisle da u tome neće uspjeti, žele ih ušutkati, zabraniti im da drugačije misle i govore, difamirati ih hajkama, napadima, govorom mržnje. Ono što mene osobno, a vjerujem i mnoge druge, osobito brine je to da upravo oni koji tvrde da se zalažu za toleranciju, za poštivanje različitosti, sada sa toliko bijesa, sa toliko isključivosti, sa toliko mržnje žele se suprotstaviti drugima koji imaju drugačije ideje. Neprisvajanje prava na jednu i apsolutnu istinu je temeljno obilježje demokracije za koje se mi, Hrvatska demokratska stranka, uvijek je zalagala. Mi smo, nažalost, živjeli u sustavu u kojem to nije bilo, sustavu, barem moja generacija i starije generacije, koje je zabranjivalo drugačije mišljenje i drugačiji govor. I želimo jasno reći onima koji ga i danas zagovaraju da neće uspjeti ponovo nam ga nametnuti. Ja bih završio sa parafrazirajući riječi Voltairea, barem se pripisuju Voltairu. Ja se možda neću složiti sa svime što ćete vi danas ovdje reći, ali ću do zadnjeg daha braniti vaše pravo da to govorite. Hvala lijepo.
Hvala gospodine potpredsjedniče. Samo kratko naglasiti, zaboravio sam pozdraviti i gospodina Miletića, dobrodošli, i naglasiti naravno da što se tiče naših zastupnika u Hrvatskom saboru da je ovo jedan višestranačni sastav, da imamo kolege iz različitih stranaka u Hrvatskom saboru. Sada bi vas zamolio, doktorice Reisman, da započnete s vašim izlaganjem. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I deeply appreciate the kind and generous words that you have both expressed today. And before I speak about the issue that we've come together to discuss, in some ways, maybe not, but in some ways, this whole issue of democracy versus totalitarianism versus censorship is significantly, in a sense, larger even than my presentation regarding the child sexual abuse that was underpinning the so-called science that formulates human sexuality education. And the reason is that, yeah, so long as there are violent, excuse me, presentations to people, they frighten most human beings, and then they shut down the capacity to dialogue, to speak, to share knowledge and opinion. And when that is shut down, then we all suffer, all of us. And of course, the people who will suffer the most will always be the children, because they are the ones who will suffer the most for any kind of violation of our civil behavior. So, having said that, I have been treated beautifully by first of all, my wonderful reception in the medical school. I deeply appreciated that at the university. And I've been treated wonderfully by Croatian people. No question about that. The reception has been warm, it has been kind, it has been thoughtful, it has been a delight. And I think my colleague, Tim Tate, certainly experienced the same thing, the same kind of attention and kindness. So you're correct, certainly there are the two forms of behavior. And I hope that with what I will be discussing today, that some people who have been angry, who have been hostile, who have been unable to listen, that they too will find themselves softened and curious and willing to consider other information for their own purposes, for their own selves, and for the children of Croatia. So, moving then beyond that, the question is sex education in Croatia. Excuse me, and I will explain that I am here because of Karolina Vidovic, yes. Excuse me for my poor knowledge of Croatian, how to say even names yet. But Karolina's extraordinary treatment by what I understand is your public television. I worked for public television in the United States for many years, producing and as a performer and as an artist and so on. And so my heart went out to her and to the Croatian people, because what she had done was to do her professional job as a journalist in presenting information that she thought was extremely important for the Croatian public to hear. So when I became informed about her chastisement, her punishment, I thought this was completely unacceptable, and chose to accept an invitation here to discuss, especially since she was being punished because she was screening segments of a documentary in which I appeared, in which Mr. Tate was involved, on Kinsey, on the background of human sexuality education in Croatia. So that became very important, and I felt almost, in a sense, responsible, if that's clear, for, excuse me, for her position, for her chastisement. So that is what brought me here. And so I am here to talk to you now about the fact that you have put into place, apparently dogmatically, without vote, without discussion, without input from your public, sex education, which is amazing and unacceptable. I understand that the proposed sex education did not go through a panel of members of the church, of the synagogues, of the various religious communities, of parents, and of others whose children will be trained by those who have their ideology. to me, coming from the United States and even Great Britain, which Mr. Tate will talk about, as difficult and as problematic as sex education has been there, certainly it has not been dogmatically imposed behind, behind doors, as it were. So, having said that, the sex education as it is proposed is focused upon what's called gender, to a great extent, gender education. We have learned in the United States that gender education is a very plastic concept, which is extremely confusing and wrong-headed and based upon no science whatsoever. None. None. As a matter of fact, it's anti-science, anti-history, anti-common sense, and anti-science. So the basis for this comes down to the field of sexology, which has, as I pointed out, displaced medicine as the dominant dialogue to teach children about what sex is about. Medicine, the medical profession, the parents, and the churches and synagogues had always been the group that had educated children about what was or was not appropriate sexually. And I will suggest to you that the success of that posture, that education, is seen in your data. It's in your data. We have the data. The Daily Mail published in England, a liberal, regular English paper, published a breakdown which I sent to the television broadcast station I appeared in today, had identified the rate of early abortion, which means early sexual activity, which means early venereal disease and so forth, in all of Europe. And as I hope all of you know and are pleased to know, Croatia's really at the bottom of that list. You have one of the lowest records of children's trauma, sexual trauma, which is reflected in early abortion, early venereal disease, and so on. So what you have been doing in the past, based upon the data throughout Europe, has been successful, Now, you would replace that with what? To what purpose? The whole field of human sexuality, human sexology and sex education is grounded in the work of Dr. Alfred Kinsey. And that has, of course, been my focus over the years. Dr. Kinsey, here you have the Kinsey Report, 6 Types of Orgasm, and I have the book right here. This is Kinsey's book, right here, okay? And anyone is welcome to turn to chapter 5. I will earmark the pages that are relevant. I will read from you, from Kinsey's own book. And this becomes the foundation of your human sexuality education curricula, which is being promoted through Sasha, Dr. Stolhofer, who trained at the Kinsey Institute. So the interlocking relationship between what is said here and what Mr. Stolhofer has not criticized this, has not brought this to the attention of the public. And I will show you, I will say, okay, pre-adolescent experienced an orgasm, age when observed, a 2-month-old baby. Do you all hear me there? Age when observed for orgasm, a 2-month-old baby. For climax, one, they call it a population, then they talk about the climax of this baby. The baby didn't have the appropriate climax. A 5-month-old baby, 2 of them, one had a climax up to 1 year. 28 of these children are under age 12 months. We're talking about, and the underneath, ages of pre-adolescent orgasm based on, now this is supposed to be science, based on actual observation of 317 males, all of these are children being sexually molested, timed around the clock, because we have their times here, used with a stopwatch, around the clock, right there, and I'll earmark this for you so we can pass this around. Table 34, a 5-month-old baby allegedly has 3 orgasms. Excuse me, but are we all clear on what an orgasm is here? Do I have to go into that? No? All right. So, orgasm, as we have understood it, relates to the sexual climax, basically, of adults who know how to experience what they're experiencing and who had been identified as, having this as a function, usually, of a relationship between a woman and a man in a marital structure, all that sort of thing. Well, here we're talking about a 5-month-old baby. We're talking about a 4-year-old, and you need to look at this in the original book, that I am not creating something out of whole cloth. Because when I looked at it, my first question was, when Kinsey says, examples of multiple orgasms in pre-adolescent males, some instances of higher frequencies, I looked at a 4-year-old supposed to have 26 orgasms in 24 hours. And as a mother, much less a scientist, that's an experiment around the clock. Is it not? And I said, who did it? Who did this? Because I knew Dr. Alfred Kinsey founded the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University, where Dr. Stuhlhofer trained, and founded the field of human sexuality and human sexuality education. And there is no debate about that. The Kinsey Institute has recently, would you pull one of those out so I can tag this? The Kinsey Institute recently published a book called Kinsey, the Man Who Changed the World. Based upon my analysis, I would restate that, and I would say Kinsey, the pedophile who changed the world. Because, let me explain, after all of these torturous experiences are defined here in his book, which shaped the world's opinion on sex, the whole field of sex then came out of this. There was no field of human sexuality before Kinsey. There was medical advice, there were parents, there was church, there was Bible, that sort of thing. There was no field. Kinsey created the field and then trained the people who became the purveyors of that ideology and that belief system. So I said, okay, wait a minute. We have all these children allegedly having orgasms. What does he define as an orgasm? I need another little stick. Thank you. 7 minutes, right, okay. Is this, okay, there we go. And on pages 160 and 161, you will see that what you see up there, summarized. Kinsey said in this book that the children enjoyed this sexual violence that was inflicted upon them. It's right here, in his own words. Mengele was an example of this sort of thing, and we all know how to treat Mengele. And we do not build institutes based on Mengele. And we do not train people to engage in activities that Mengele engaged in. And we do not give them PhDs and allow them to go around the world training other people in Mengele's methodologies. This is our form of that kind of thing. And what Kinsey defined as an orgasm is summarized for you there. He said there were 6 types of orgasm. He's talking about 196 pre-adolescent boys are the sources of these percentage figures. He talks about extreme tension, violent convulsions. He talks about hysterical talking, crying. He talks about children, especially when the younger children, they're hysterical and they're weeping. And he talks about extreme trembling. And then he says pain, frightened at the approach of orgasm. And then he says he gives percentages for that. And he concludes they derive definite pleasure from the situation. That's his conclusion. And my conclusion is that is a sadomasochistic pedophile describing that. Anyone who thinks that an adult is taking pleasure based upon screaming and crying and writhing in pain is a sadomasochist, and anyone who describes children in that manner is a sadomasochistic pedophile. Now, when I saw your modules for sex education, and I realized that what you are about to initiate here, elementary school, 8th grade, 4th grade, sex, gender, equity, and responsible sexual behavior. Well, I had more time, at the medical school to screen some of the National Institute of Health brain scans that are now standard in the field, and everybody understands are standard in the field. There is no way, scientifically, much less common sense, much less mummies and daddies understand, much less the law understands. There is no way for children to be exposed to this kind of stimuli that's being proposed about you can be a boy, you can be a girl, you can be this, you can be that. Mommy, daddy, what toilet do I use, yeah? Where do I go? How do I practice this? There's no way for children to bring what's called here critical thinking. Critical thinking? That's not possible. The brain science is very, very clear on that. I was criticized by your head of the philosophy because I talked about the brain science. Huh? That's the brain science. As if you actually needed it to know that children have to be able to grow up knowing that they're girls, knowing that they're boys, allowing them to grow without sexual stimuli coming to them through cartoons, through films, and so on. In the United States of America, we have allowed a lot of this to take place, and we have seen, as I said, every measure of sexual dysfunction off the charts. Now gonorrhea is making a reappearance. Big pharmaceutical companies now, as Dr. Strohhofer pointed out, the major pharmaceutical companies are now financing most of the sex education, most of the sexology research. Well, the major pharmaceutical companies have a huge reason to look toward sexual dysfunction. I think you know why. Of course, impotence is going to increase massive sales of Viagra, and they're looking for a female Viagra pill to equal the male Viagra pill. Early sexual transmitted diseases, well, sexually transmitted diseases has given the pharmaceutical company in our country in 1992 the right to vaccinate, and parents didn't know this, they didn't know it, to vaccinate or inoculate their children, newborns, for hepatitis B, which was a venereal disease. What little baby needs to be vaccinated for a venereal disease? Newborn child. Medically, you're looking at a heart that's that big, lungs, no immune system really is working, and you're vaccinating these children, you're inoculating these children. There's fallout from that. By now, we have HPV, human papillomavirus, which the pharmaceutical companies are making a fortune on as well in vaccinating young children, because they're saying that the children may be sexually active and therefore they may get venereal disease, and therefore we have to vaccinate them. And yes, we have a huge backlash amongst parents in the United States of America fighting these vaccinations, fighting these inoculations. We're talking about now proposed syphilis vaccinations for children, gonorrhea vaccinations for children, hepatitis B. What do you think happens to a child's body with all of those, what we medically call insults to that body, when that child has to experience all of this? Am I running over time? Okay. So I will propose to you that your sex education program is based on ideology, sexual ideology, not on science. Absolutely not. And I will also guarantee, word of honor, put my life on the line. You initiate this EU sort of program, but Tim Tate pointed out it's not done in Britain, okay, in that sense. You initiate this program, and you will, I promise you, you will see sexually transmitted diseases amongst children increase rapidly. You will see abortions amongst children start to rise rapidly. You will see every form of multiple partners, that sort of thing, increase because children are children. They mimic what they see. They do what they see. That's how they become adults. And you will pay a huge price, not only economically in terms of poverty, because we have the data on that, but you will see a huge increase in emotional and political instability from such a thing.
Hvala doktorice Reisman. Ja ću sad zamoliti gospodina Tatea da izloži njegov dio prezentacije da bi kasnije mogli otvoriti raspravu. Ja? Mr. Tate.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am genuinely honored to be invited to speak to you here today, and I apologize for speaking in English. I don't speak Croatian. I should perhaps explain why a British journalist and a documentary filmmaker has the temerity to speak to such an important body as this. A little background. I have worked as a journalist and an investigative journalist and as a filmmaker for more than 30 years. I have specialized throughout this time in investigating and examining child sexual abuse. I have made many documentary films, and I have written several books on the subject. Any discussion of child sexual abuse is difficult to hear. And in Britain and in America, it's often sadly the case that the people in Britain and America, it's proved sadly to be the case that very often people find it so difficult to hear that the messenger is attacked rather than the message being listened to. I continue to work in this field because I believe that this issue is too important to be kept hidden. I've worked extensively with British police forces, with British social services and child protection departments to increase understanding of how and why children are subjected to sexual abuse. And I would, if I may, like to take a moment to refer to the politics of pedophilia. I have been a lifelong socialist. I will go to my grave believing in and fighting for democratic socialist principles. In this, I come from the opposite end of the political spectrum to Judith, and we have many very happy discussions when we agree to disagree. But I don't believe, in fact, I am certain that child sexual abuse is not a party political issue. Left-right divisions are not relevant. Sexual abuse is a problem that affects children of all classes, all races, all creeds, all colours, all social groups, and yes, of all political affiliations. And children cannot be protected by ignorance. We cannot protect them if we don't discuss and debate the facts, the science, and indeed the best way to protect them. And that is why I was so disturbed to hear of what happened to Karolina Kristo. When I made my film about Kinsey and his use of paedophiles, someone tried to have me sacked. I was accused of being a campaigner against child abuse. Well, I'm very proud to be a campaigner against child abuse, and fortunately, at that point, I kept my job. It is simply wrong for Ms. Kristo to have been disciplined for bringing to the attention of her viewers facts which should be debated, which should be discussed, and should be seen in the open. I know today that you've asked for information about how Britain deals and addresses sex education and how it delivers it to its school students. I'm not an academic, but I am happy to explain what the British laws are and how they work concerning the sexual education of children. I should stress that I'm the father of 6 children. My children are grown up, but each of them has been through sexual education classes in British schools, and I supported that. I support, in principle, the the importance of sexual education in school. But, and this is a big but, there has to be an overall purpose for this sexual education. What is it trying to do? We know why we teach children maths. We know why we teach them French or German. What is the purpose of sexual education in schools? If it is not aimed rigorously at protecting children, then I think there may be a problem. And the other thing, and we'll come to the British laws in a second, is that if we are going to educate our children about sex, it has to be done at a time which is appropriate in their educational, physical, emotional, and mental development. And it has to use materials which are age appropriate. And whilst I wouldn't ever claim for my country that we've got things all completely right, I think what we have put in place is a pretty good stab at it. It's possibly best to leave the details of that for questions, because I'm sure you will have questions about that. But if I could perhaps leave this by framing whatever answers I give within 3 statutory rules. These are enshrined in British law about the sexual education of children. The first thing to note is that by law, the only sex education which must be taught to children, which has to be taught, is biological facts. Reproduction, puberty, hormones, and the way sexually transmitted diseases are transmitted. Those have to be taught by law. Schools do not have to teach anything else. It is recommended that they teach other elements of sexual education within what's called personal sexual health education classes. But even if they do, and they do not have to do this, the law specifically states that these must be framed within a moral framework which includes the word marriage. It includes the key phrase morality. And finally, the law in Britain has one final protection for parents. Any parent who does not wish their child to have this secondary level of child sexual education, not the biological stuff, has a right to withdraw their child from that class. And that reflects a simple view in my country that people have different religious, ethical, moral codes, and they may not wish their children to deal with that. Their children must be educated in the biology of sex, but the wider concepts, it is voluntary. And if that helps to frame any information you'd like, I hope it does anyway. Thank you.
Hvala puno, gospodine Tate. Evo, sad ćemo otvoriti za zastupnike i članove saborskih odbora raspravu. Ako smijem ja samo započeti sa prvim pitanjem za doktoricu Reisman. Spomenuli ste koliko je u Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama važna rasprava bila prije uvođenja seksualnog odgoja u školama. Pa me zanima, evo, od gospodina Tatea smo to čuli kakav je sistem u Velikoj Britaniji. Ako nam možete još nešto više reći o toj raspravi prije uvođenja tog seksualnog odgoja u SAD-u, kako se ona odvijala, neke elemente oko toga, jer čini mi se da upravo nedostatak te prave istinske rasprave je ono što je dovelo do određenih ne samo nesuglasica, nego doista i problema koji se danas mi suočavamo u Hrvatskoj. Hvala.
Yeah, well, it's somewhat complicated because, of course, in the United States of America, we had what was called hygiene, kind of always, sexual hygiene. Or we had what was called marriage education, that sort of thing. And up to when Alfred Kinsey entered the scene, children did receive information about sexually transmitted diseases in the sense that when they had a health class, they were taught, look, you don't have sex with people before you get married. And if you have sex with people before you get married, you're liable to get various kinds of diseases. And they would mention, in those years, it was syphilis and gonorrhea. We have now about 25 or 30, depending upon how you look at it, new ones and various old ones and so forth. So in that sense, we would have, sex hygiene was taught. People were taught that they should be, health-wise, be clean and all sorts of things like that. But the emphasis was really only on, within a marital structure, and there was no special detail. And at that point in time, our STD rates were down here, and our abortion rates were non-existent because, of course, abortion was against the law at the time anyway. And all of our health measures were noticeably much better, there's no question, than at rape and everything else, which is a sexual issue here. So then we had an organization called Planned Parenthood. I don't know if you know about Planned Parenthood. Well, okay, we had an organization that was connected with the Kinsey Institute in many ways, sharing the same lawyers and that kind of thing. Planned Parenthood entered into the scene. There was a book saying, well, we really don't have a great deal of information about human sexuality, and so the children need information about human sexuality. And so, unfortunately, something of what has happened here happened in the United States, in the sense that the schools were getting information from Planned Parenthood and various people coming around, and the parents never knew it, did not know that their children were being trained other than the way they were trained themselves. And so they did not suspect that the children were learning things and being shown pictures as they were. So slowly, there developed a conflict between these two as the parents began to understand what was taking place, because their children were coming home with funny stories and whatnot. And as Planned Parenthood gained more strength and the Kinsey Institute was training people and so forth, we developed two separate camps. One camp was the camp we're talking about here, which would be parents, which would be religion, which was starting to wake up and say, wait a minute, what is this they're saying? And the other camp would have been Planned Parenthood, and they began to have conflict. And so, but this started in 1970. I have the first sex education booklet, which I have with me, I think, my children came home with. That's how I used to give money to Planned Parenthood. I used to support Planned Parenthood. Because I thought that sex, like most parents, I thought sex education meant, teaching them biological, the names of the parts. They're not going to use saying little silly names and so forth. And my children came home with a pamphlet from Planned Parenthood, from their school, junior high school, and it's called "You've Changed the Combination." And in it, they told children, you can have sex with anybody that you want, but it should be, quote unquote, consensual. Now you're telling children they can have consensual sex with anyone they want. And then it says if you want a body, you can buy one. There are women who have, I'm quoting, freely chosen that business. They're talking about prostitution. And then it went on and it said, if you want a virgin, buy one. There are girls who have freely chosen that business. Marriage is the price you'll pay. This is 1974. And you'll get the virgin very temporarily. Now, that disturbed me. So I went to the school, I spoke with the teacher, I talked with the children. They had graphics that were wholly inappropriate. And I found that they claimed they were going to stop distributing this, but they continued. Over the next year, I found out because another one of my children came home and threw the pamphlet on the table and said, well, here we are. So the behind the scenes, I hate to use the word, the conspiratorial sort of technique that you're seeing here, really, started back in the United States about 1970s, and that has now continued on. At this point, parents in some states have a lot more strength. They do have what they call opt-out provisions. They can take their children out of the class. The children have to be allowed to go to a library and read books or whatever. So there's all this kind of thing taking place in the United States as we faced this dramatic increase in sexually transmitted diseases and sex abuse of children by children, which, of course, pornography has contributed to and so forth. That's a long-winded, I'm so sorry, explanation. And by the way, I meant to say I am honored also. I don't know that I said that, but I'm certainly honored to have the opportunity to address you here in the Parliament. I deeply appreciate that and understand it as a privilege.
Hvala, doktorice Reisman. Gospodin Jandroković.
Zahvaljujem se doktorice Reisman na vrlo zanimljivom izlaganju. Prvi put i sam čujem mnoge od tih stvari, jer ova je rasprava u Hrvatskoj nova. Ovo je jedna od prvih, u stvari, svjetonazorskih rasprava koja je vjerojatno tako žestoka zbog toga što do sada nismo imali prilike raspravljati o tim stvarima. A reakcija ovih lijevih radikala, takozvanih demokrata, proizlazi, čini mi se, iz toga što je po prvi puta ova konzervativna opcija zauzela jedan čvrsti stav i pokazala da neće dozvoliti da se bez rasprave provede, u stvari, jedan tajni, puzajući plan koji će izmijeniti hrvatsko društvo. Mene zanima, vjerojatno ćete mi moći odgovoriti na to pitanje, kakav je prijedlog ovog hrvatskog zdravstvenog odgoja i posebno taj modul 4 koji se tiče seksualnog odgoja u odnosu na ostale evropske države? Ne znam da li imate informacije o tome. Zanima me da li je on među liberalnijima, da li je on nekakav srednji ili kakvo je vaše mišljenje o tome?
Well, I think Mr. Tate has a great deal of information about both Great Britain and some of the other countries. However, I do know, of course, that the concept of a plastic gender, that is, there is no gender, that one can adopt any sex that one chooses, which comes out of Kinsey's arguments that we are all really bisexual, that 10 to 37% of the population has been homosexual, but that we are really bisexual and we are plastic. He called that a continuum. That kind of position, that kind of unjustified, there is no science to confirm that. I mean, I have to stress that. But that kind of non-scientific and non-commonsensical position is dominating a whole broad spectrum of European countries. Certainly, I thought it was in Great Britain strictly as well, too, but Tim informs me that they have moved out of that kind of concept, I think. So these are all, and this all kind of interlocks with the UN rights of the child issue. When is a child a child? What is consent? What is age of consent? All these fluid definitions are very problematic. If you have age of consent that's 21, then all sorts of laws cover everybody up to 21. If you have age of consent that's 13, then a broad spectrum of laws cover only children up to age 13, or rather, 12 years and whatever. And so there is too much flexibility, is what I would say. We say in the United States, wiggle room. There is too much flexibility for teachers to teach what they feel that they've been trained with at one point in time, with no responsibility to the parents, even in a sense to the government, depending upon how that has filtered through. So I see this as a key component for child sexual abuse, not only by Kinsey and his people, but by children on other children now, and by adults on children and so forth. So, and I've written extensively on that as well. I hope that.
Ako se kolege slažu, ja bih zamolio gospodina Tate ako može malo podrobnije još elaborirati oko odgovora na ovo pitanje, pogotovo sa perspektive iskustava u Velikoj Britaniji ili u nekim drugim europskim zemljama.
I will ask a question before answering that. If anyone here could tell me, first of all, what is the purpose of your proposed sexual education classes?
Mi smo naravno pozvali i ministra i predstavnike ministarstva koji bi zapravo najautoritativniji mogli odgovoriti s obzirom da su oni nositelji tog programa. Međutim, ja bih vas ipak zamolio ako možemo se vratiti na ovo pitanje kolege Androkovića, ako možete na tome dati još jedan podrobniji odgovor, ako ne možemo, ako hoćete gospodine Tate sada.
It's fine. It seems to me relevant what the purpose, what it is you're trying to achieve. I can tell you what Britain is trying to achieve, and I don't think we're necessarily succeeding, but I can tell you what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve an education of children, firstly, so that they understand the biology of their bodies, which I think is perfectly sensible. And secondly, when we teach sex, and we have sex education, the phrase and the aim of it is very interesting to me and very clear. It wants to equip children to delay having sex until they are not children anymore. And I think that's a very good aim. The other thing I would ask, again, it's not a question, but I'd ask you to consider, because you have teachers teaching these classes, and when children feel able to talk about sex with their teachers, what will inevitably happen at some point is a child will tell that teacher that he or she is having sexual activity with an adult. That will happen. There will be a child who says that. What do your sex ed proposals tell the teacher to do with that information? I can tell you in Britain, it's mandatory. Children are told, whatever you say to us cannot be kept in confidence if it relates to this. Teachers have, by law, to report that to the police and to the child protection services. And I think that's a very important thing. And I think sometimes when we focus only on what the children are going to learn, we forget that teachers have a role in this too.
By the way, that's the case also in the United States. This is mandatory reporting. They must immediately report to the police, and the social services becomes involved in that.
Dr. Milinović.
Hvala lijepo. Ja sam sa pozornošću pratio vaše izlaganje, pa i kao ginekolog sam neke stvari znao, a neke sam i danas naučio. Ja sam inače bivši ministar zdravstva u prošlom sazivu vlade. Možda nije pitanje, ali možda možemo prokomentirati. Ja mislim da mi kao demokršćanska opcija se nalazimo pred novim izazovima. I ako ne nađemo pravo rješenje i pravi odgovor na nove izazove, izgubit ćemo ovu bitku. Zašto to kažem? Moj otac ili moji roditelji su imali privilegij odgajati mene. Društvene mreže, internet i mediji u trenutku mog odrastanja su ipak imali mali utjecaj na moj odgoj. Mi smo imali jednu veliku raspravu, Gordon je rekao da je ovo prva svjetonadzorska velika rasprava u posljednjih nekoliko godina, ali vjerojatno je priboravio da smo donesli i donijeli zakon prije 2 godine o medicinskoj oplodnji, umjetnoj oplodnji. I tada smo isto imali veliku svjetonazorsku raspravu gdje smo, zamislite, a vi ste osjetili na svojoj koži što znači pod navodnike naklonost medija, gdje mi, demokršćanska opcija u Hrvatskoj koja je izglasala taj zakon, u samo jednu promjenu, gdje nismo dozvolili zamrzavanje zametaka, što mi smatramo da su živa bića. Nismo dozvolili to iz jednog razloga što smo imali pravu alternativu tome. Ali smo godinu dana bili prikazani u novinama čak sličice kao ratni zločinci i pisalo je ovo su ti koji su izglasali ovaj zakon. Ja mislim da se toga kolege sjećaju. Danas, ako mi demokršćani nemamo ili ako nećemo naći odgovor na ove nove izazove, dakle, kroz društvene mreže, kroz medije, bojim se da ćemo izgubiti ovu bitku. Zašto to kažem? I onda kada nakon godinu dana postojanja tog zakona pobjedili smo, jer je po tom novom zakonu gdje je zabranjeno zamrzavanje zametaka rođeno 200 djece više u Hrvatskoj. To je bio odgovor onima, no međutim kad su se vratili na vlast, prva sjednica Sabora ili jedna od prvih odluka ove vlade je bila vraćanje i zapravo dozvoljavanje zamrzavanja zametaka. Ali zašto kažem da ćemo izgubiti bitku ako ne budemo imali svi zajedno? I to je pred demokršćanima, ne u Hrvatskoj, nego u Europi, pa i u svijetu, novi izazov. Kada smo donosili taj zakon, što su napravili mediji, što su napravile društvene mreže? Ja sam došao kući, mene su moja djeca pitala, tata, zašto si zabranio umjetnu oplodnju? To je utjecaj medija. Bojim se da u modernom i postmodernom društvu nemamo mi roditelji da gubimo polako taj privilegij odgajanja naše djece. To je osnovni problem. Na to i naša stranka kao demokršćanska stranka, demokršćani u cjelini moraju imati izazove, ali bojim se da tu bitku, da ulazimo neravnopravno u tu bitku. Vas optužiti za antisemitizam, mislim da tu uopće ne treba nikakvog komentara, niti je to nešto što se može komentirati. I zato su pred nama novi izazovi, ali smatram da smo dovoljno jaki pa i organizirani da odgovorimo na tako nešto i da pobjedimo i da odgajamo našu djecu u smislu da je obitelj stožerna snaga svakog uspjeha. Ali nije i neće biti lako. Evo, hvala.
Hvala kolegi Milinoviću. Kolega Kulišić.
Poštovana gospođo Reisman, dobrodošli u Hrvatsku, dobrodošli u Hrvatski sabor. Ono što ste doživjeli na Fakultetu političkih znanosti sigurno nije slika Hrvatske, jer većina Hrvatske ne misli onako kao što su oni vama tamo prikazali. Nitko nama ne može zabraniti svoje mišljenje, a ovo što se dogodilo vašim dolaskom nadilazi puno toga, jer nismo mogli vjerovati da toliko netolerancije u Hrvatskom saboru od pojedinih političkih stranaka. Digli su se svi na noge da vam zabrane dolazak u Hrvatski sabor, što je katastrofa. 50 godina u vrijeme komunizma su ljudi za svoje mišljenje završavali u komunističkim kazamatima. Imamo i tu minimalno jednog čovjeka koji je bio zbog toga, koji je puno odslužio i odležao predsjednika Hrvatskog helsinškog odbora koji tamo sjedi i pozdravljam ga ovom prilikom. Slažem se s vama da ovo nije stručni nego ideološki zakon i ovo je nešto što nismo mogli vjerovati da se može dogoditi u Hrvatskoj. Nitko njima ne brani imati svoje mišljenje, hvaliti paradu ponosa, to je ok. A mislim da mi ovo danas možemo nazvati slobodno skup ponosa velikoj većini onih stvari koje vi podržavate. Prije 50 godina su u vrijeme komunizma za mišljenje završavali u zatvoru. Danas je gospođa Krišto kao novinarka iznijela jednu emisiju gdje je skinuta sa posla i gdje svi skupa trebamo napraviti da povuku svoju odluku i da gospođa može raditi svoj posao kao što je do sad radila. Hvala vam još jednom za svoj dolazak u Hrvatsku. Mislim da ste vašim dolaskom napravili puno za Hrvatsku.
Hvala kolegi Kulišiću. Mislim da je izuzetno bitno i dalje ovako nastaviti u duhu tolerancije ovu raspravu. Tolerancija uvijek je dvosmjerna ulica. Nekada, evo, i s naše strane u nekoj političkoj raspravi znamo ponekada i prijeći i možda i uvrijediti, ali onda je uvijek dobro znati se i zaustaviti, pa ispričati i krenuti ponovno putem tolerancije, međusobnog uvažavanja. Evo, u istom tom duhu zamolit ću sada i kolegicu Tomašić da postavi pitanje.
Hvala lijepa, gospođo Reisman. Jedno pitanje. U Americi čujem da se mladi sada organiziraju u grupe gdje kažu da daju potporu jednim drugima i ne žele imati seks do braka, da se čuvaju za brak. Recite mi kako te grupe napreduju i da li imaju pomoć od države ili samo od roditelja? Hvala.
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised that issue, because very often the youth themselves and their positions are ignored. Yeah, and frankly, it had become so bad, in our country. So many children were suffering so badly, and their friends were having venereal diseases, and they are drinking and drugs and all this sort of thing, that the children themselves have started what they call them chastity groups or something, and they've started those kinds of activities on their own, and I give them enormous credit for that. But I also at the same time give us enormous blame for putting children into that position where they have to defend themselves against a dominant sexual ideology that they are dealing with all the time, not just from the media, which is certainly true, but within their own schools and so on. But yes, indeed, and they're organizing all over the country, and it is exciting. I mean, it's true. It's rather thrilling to see these young people standing up and taking pledges and meaning it. And I'll give you an example, by the way, of one very successful program. Elaine Bennett, who was the wife of the drug czar, Bennett, Bob Bennett, or not Bob, William, thank you, William Bennett. Elaine, many years ago, started a program for black youth inside poverty-ridden youth. Because the black youth, by the way, had been the first attack, I should tell you, of the Planned Parenthood. They went into Washington, D.C., and presented the very first sex programs to the black children. This was way back in the 60s, late 60s. And the black parents at the time voiced enormous protests, and they said, you're going to sexualize our children, to these nice white do-gooder educators who had come in. The black parents objected strenuously, but they were ignored. And then, so subsequently, we have terrible problems within the black community, and the children are really terribly endangered, and everything that the black parents said was going to happen did happen, and the increases in STDs and so forth. Well, Elaine Bennett organized something that she called the Diamond Girls, and she developed a program which I would urge you actually to look into, because her program for those black youth who had been exposed to all of this was extraordinary. They would, the majority of these young girls, it was for girls really, but I think they extended it now to boys, the majority of these young girls, I think almost 100% of them, got through to the end of high school. You may think this sounds silly, but it's not. Got through to the end of high school not having been involved in any kind of sexual activity. And at the end of that, they graduated and they got a little diamond, necklace sort of thing. And that was a major achievement, because at least they reached the end of high school without getting distracted and overwhelmed and overcome by sexual activity and then therefore by fallout from that. But yes, our youngsters have been organizing themselves and they have been carrying on conferences and all that sort of thing. And I give them credit, but I give us blame.
Gospodine Tate.
Sorry, if I could add one thing to the questioner's question. Again, Dr. Reisman and I, we come from different spectrums. For a person over 16, provided they know what they're doing, I don't have a problem, whatever their sexual choices are. What I do feel is extremely sad and extremely indicative of a failure is that we have to have voluntary groups set up to protect children. The law should protect children. I'm sorry. The law should protect children under 16 from sexual activity. And if it doesn't, and if we're having to rely on voluntary groups, then I think the law and the society has failed.
Kolega Babić.
Hvala lijepa. Pa moje pitanje je zapravo i za doktoricu Reisman, ali i za gospodina Tate-a. Svejedno, možda vi odgovarate više, pa gospodin Tate. Rekli ste na samom početku, koliko se ne varam, da Hrvatska ima zapravo najmanju stopu maloljetničkih trudnoća, a time i spolno prenosivih bolesti. I rekli ste da ne razumijete zašto bi neko, ako je nešto dobro, to danas mijenjao. Pa evo i u tom kontekstu mene interesira, jer mi nismo niti Amerika, niti neka velika država, imamo 4,5 milijuna ljudi i kao svaka država imamo svoju povijest i tradiciju. Za nas je obitelj svetinja i mišljenja smo da zapravo se želi uništiti taj institucionalno obitelj u našem društvu jer smo malo društvo. Pa me zanima, u kome je interesu? Je li to, rekli ste da je gospodin Tate socijalist, vi ste konzervativac, ali da imate slična mišljenja po ovome pitanju, u kome je interesu? Je li to ideološki ili je to vezano za biznis? Evo, hvala.
In 3 minutes.
Who's... Oh, yes. Okay. Who's trying to impose? Well, I believe that that it is an ideological battle. I think that the family is absolutely targeted for destruction. In order to destroy the family, you must destroy the religious support of the religious basis for the family, the morality that religion brings to children, the restrictions that are protective restrictions for those children. Let me mention one important thing that I hadn't really talked about. I don't think I even talked about it at medicine. Look, fear of sexual activity, fear is something that the ideologues accuse us. They say, well, we don't want children to fear. Yes, we do. Of course you do. Children have a natural fear of being involved in sexual activity. It's a survival method. If they do not have that survival method in place, which is one of the big reasons when they have teachers come and talk to them about sex, they get very nervous. It isn't just the parents, it's the child. Most children don't ever want to hear about mommy and daddy having sex, you know? And even when they get older, they don't want to hear about it. And
especially when they get older.
Especially when they get older, excuse me. Yes. And so yes, I do believe, I do really know, I don't just believe it, I know it, that the family must be destroyed in order to take complete control of the children, in order to take complete control of the society, and to establish if you thought communism was a problem, face the future. You know, we've had dystopian novels based on that. You know, we've had, in which talked about the sexualization of children, which then would control everything. When a child is being sexualized early, that child does not have a mind. They will not have a mind, an independent. Now, some people will. Always there are a few that come through any indoctrination. I came through an indoctrination. I don't agree with it anymore. But that does not apply actually to the whole. Yes, the family is the target in order for the family to be destroyed, and that's my background and my research on the UN and rights of the child and all that sort of thing. In order to do that, you destroy the church, you destroy the synagogue, you destroy the religious belief system.
Pogled sa strane
Very briefly,
gospodina Tate.
very briefly, I would, if you ask why is this happening? What is driving this movement? My personal belief is that there is a near global attempt to sexualize children, and that behind that is very simply commerce. Children represent a market for commercial companies, and if you look, when we talk about the media, forget television necessarily or documentaries, advertising, social media, there is a movement to sexualize children younger and younger. As I said the other day, why else would Playboy be selling pencil cases that only children use with the Playboy symbol on? I think behind everything else there is a move to treat children as a commodity, both as a purchasing commodity and as a commodity which can be purchased. And I think that's wrong.
Hvala vam puno. Ima li još možda pitanja od strane saborskih zastupnika ili članova odbora? Ako ne, imamo samo vremena još za dva pitanja koje mogu gosti postaviti. Prvi profesor Fuchs, pa onda doktor Čorušić.
Hvala na prilici da samo na ovom vrlo interesantnom skupu i sastanku prvo zahvalim svim sudionicima, drugo upoznam kako naše goste, tako i zastupnike, ali jednako tako i medije, da kao bivši ministar znanosti, obrazovanja i športa, naravno da sam se susretao i sa potpuno sličnom problematikom, pogotovo kada je u pitanju zdravstveni odgoj i poglavito komponenta unutar njega spolnog odgoja. I tada su bile suprotstavljene grupe koje su zastupale različiti pogled na ovu problematiku i tada je postojao grozd i tada je postojao više liberalni dio onih koji su određenu, ajmo na neki način reći, ideologiju i svjetonazor. Tada, 2008. godine, napravljena je velika studija koja je u konačnici pokazala nešto vrlo interesantno, a radila je jedan nezavisni institut. Studija se zove Vanjsko vrednovanje eksperimentalnog programa odgoja i obrazovanja u osnovnim i srednjim školama, u prvom redu zdravstvenog i spolnog odgoja, gdje je na kraju rečeno da sve što se ovim novim programima nudi je već sadržano u postojećim programima i nastavi zdravstvenog odgoja u našim osnovnim i srednjim školama. U konačnici i sada smo svjedoci toga da se u Hrvatskoj govori da se već 70% onoga što se nudi novim programom već do sada predavalo i očito je jedina i isključivi problem u toj četvrtom modulu kada se govori o spolnosti. Mislim da ovakovo nametanje programa je bez dijaloga potpuno kontraproduktivno i ovo što ste vi doživjeli na samom početku vašeg dolaska upravo je u svjetlu onoga što pojedina grupacija želi nametnuti, u konačnici je nametnula. I ja vam zahvaljujem na vašem izlaganju. Vjerujem da će vaš boravak u Hrvatskoj nadalje biti sve više tolerantniji, sa puno više uvažavanja, što konačno svjedočimo i danas. I vjerujem da će ovo biti doprinos pokretanju dijaloga između skupina, ono što smo mi nekada radili, a koji je ovakvim jednostranim nametanjem nečega što zaista ne pridonosi smanjenju maloljetničkih trudnoća, smanjenju spolno prenosivih bolesti. Dakle, postavlja se točno pitanje zbog čega mijenjamo nešto što je dobro. Vjerujem da će se dijalog pokrenuti i da će konačno ova zemlja, koja ima puno više problema u gospodarstvu nego u spolnom odgoju naše djece, konačno se okrenuti temama i dijalogu koji zaslužuje. Hvala vam lijepo.
Hvala profesore. Evo, zbog nedostatka vremena, a opet da imamo što pluralniju raspravu, ja ću vas zamoliti da budu što kraći i koncizni komentari i konkretna pitanja. Doktor Čorušić.
Pozdravio doktoricu Reisman i doktora Tatea koji su nas došli podržati u ovoj našoj borbi protiv razvoja, neoliberalnog razvoja koncepta ljudskog društva koji se drugim imenom zove neokomunizam. Ono konkretno što ću pitati doktoricu Reisman, ona sigurno zna za Nordijski seksološki institut sa godišnjim proračunom od 54 milijuna eura, koji je zahvaljujući jednom novinaru razotkriven i nakon toga je zatvoren. Bio je u Norveškoj. Ok. Zanima me sudbina tog novinara. Je li suspendiran sa svoje televizije ili je završio kao u Hrvatskoj gospođa Karolina Krišto?
Doktorice Reisman, ako možemo prvo pitanja čuti, pa onda ćete objedinjeno odgovoriti, ako se slažete. Gospodine Čičak.
Ja ću biti vrlo kratak.
Ispričavam se, ali zbog vremena moramo ovako, bit će nam kasnije jednostavnije da mogu svi sudjelovati.
Ovdje prevladavaju tamni tonovi i pesimizam, ja se s time ne bih složio i danas ste ovdje istaknuli samo nezgodne događaje koji su dogodile prilikom dolaska profesorice. Postoje drugi događaji koji govore da ipak mora imati više optimizma. Jučer na Filozofskom fakultetu je bilo više mladih nego u najslavnija vremena 1971. Bilo je između 2 i 3 tisuće mladih koji naprosto nisu mogli ući u dvoranu. To znači da njih ta tema interesira. Drugo, sama činjenica da je profesor Štulhofer pristao na dijalog sa gospođom govori o tome da postoje snage koje su spremne za dijalog. Sama činjenica da će on večeras s njom govoriti u Westingu govori o tome da u Hrvatskoj postoji raspoloženje za dijalog. Moje informacije govore da se već dijalog na određen način vodi, ali ne javno, i ja se nadam, vjerujem da će u hrvatskom društvu prevladati one snage razuma koje će ipak uspostaviti nekakav dijalog. Nemojmo zaboraviti da smo i mi jedna od država iz postkomunističkog perioda koji nije završilo tranzicijski period, prije svega u glavama. Prema tome i u vašim raspravama manje ideologije, a više otvorenosti za dijalog. Hvala.
Hvala puno. Još samo dvije kratke intervencije. Gospođa Krišto.
Hvala gospodine zastupniče. Hvala vam svima što ste omogućili ovakvu raspravu u Hrvatskom saboru i hvala vam što ste mi dali priliku da postavim pitanje. Moje pitanje je za doktoricu Reisman i za kolegu Tatea. S obzirom na iznesene činjenice o Kinseyu i Kinseyovom institutu i očitoj povezanosti koja je danas iznesena sa današnjim rodno-spolnim odgojom, moje pitanje je i možda pitanje koje se nameće, je li ispravna i prava borba za slobodu odabira ili je možda ispravna i dobra borba da se ovakve stvari zapravo uopće ne dozvole u školama?
Hvala puno. Gospodin Miletić.
Ne, gospodin Tate i doktorica Reisman.
Aha, još vi ćete kasnije? Hoćete? Onda ja bih vas zamolio, ako više nema pitanja, da budu, ispričavam se, ako više nema pitanja, da doktorica Reisman objedinjeno odgovori na sva ova pitanja, pa ćemo onda imati i završne riječi. Hvala.
Okay, my brain is, older now, so it doesn't quickly grasp things quite as much as they used to. So what happened to the Norwegian journalist, right? Yes. Yeah, that's very interesting and very exciting. The Norwegian journalist who revealed the bogus institute in Norway, he ended up with closing down that entire system. And as far as it looked like they were completely out of business, but I checked the website, and they moved themselves to Sweden, and to the last I saw, not the whole Scandinavian support system, but some sort of some way that they were repudiated then by the whole entire Scandinavian coalition, which was very fascinating, and it was really quite amazing to watch. And so that, of course, can take place, that can happen. It causes me to think it could happen with the Kinsey Institute. So anyway, and I don't know that anything bad ever happened to him. He appears to be functioning quite well and still in place in Norway. And if you aren't aware of that, you ought to sort of get that information out. Okay, I also couldn't agree more thoroughly with the idea that what has happened here already is the interest of the public and the students is very, 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 very clear. So this dialogue, and that Sasha Stolhofer is willing and ready to continue this debate, and yesterday's flood of people, I mean, the largest they said ever that they ever saw, says to me that on both sides of this issue, you have a great deal of interest. Now, some people may be intense, but, depends on what they hear. So I will be happily having a debate with Sasha Stolhofer this afternoon or this evening or something. And the Kinsey Institute link, I have to point out, I have sent an open letter to your minister and to the head of Carolina's television station, HRT, thank you. I have sent an open letter to them asking for a meeting with them, to dialogue with these politically powerful people, and about what has happened to one of their key journalists because of the research that she was doing based upon the work that I did and that Tim reported. So I hope that will take place. I would encourage everybody to encourage that to take place so that the political process can open up more. Last question, the freedom to choose. Well, okay. I have huge problems. I differ with Tim. We always have all these years, and it hasn't changed. I have huge problems with handing over any form of human sexuality education to teachers other than the most basic hygiene sort of things, because it evolves too often, frankly, into trickery that I have seen over time, and teachers do teach their own moral ethics. Morality is defined by what you feel is moral. And so I would open that discussion up for a very different approach than just saying children can be taken out of the school system. I think that dialogue has to take place politically with all of you, and with parents involved, and with church involved, and with synagogue involved, and imams and all that sort of thing. And that you come up with what conclusions you feel are adequate, and I'll be very happy to lend whatever support I can to such an effort. You can become a standard, perhaps, for the rest of Europe.
Hvala vam puno, doktorice. Prije završne riječi, ili vi ste htjeli još jedno pitanje postaviti? Završne riječi ćemo imati, pa onda ćemo zaključiti već raspravu. Onda bih zamolio, gospodina Tatea. Tako je, gospodina Tatea da odgovori objedinjeno na ova pitanja, tako da kasnije možemo već i zaključiti sjednicu. Please, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Just a summary. Very briefly, Someone much wiser and more succinct than I am once said, bad things happen in dark places. The answer to that is information and it's debate in public. To Carolina's question, let me address Carolina's first. That Carolina has been disciplined for doing her journalist job is a disgrace. Mm-hmm. If that happened in Britain, it is likely that the British Parliament would have questions asked. Parliamentarians would stand up and ask questions. That the British Prime Minister, I have to say, would never get involved in the way I understand your Prime Minister has got involved. I think that's deeply worrying, and anything I can do to support her and anything you can do to support her is important. The last thing I would leave you with, when I said bad things happen in dark places, we need to remember that the family can sometimes be a dark place.
Yes, that's true.
The majority of child sexual abuse happens within families. If, and this returns to the question I asked you a while ago, if there is no clarity about what sex education is for, if it isn't clear that it's to empower and enable the child not to be a sexual object, then I think your sexual education program will fail.
Hvala vam puno. Gospodine Tate, evo jedna kratka replika. Takvo pitanje je postavljeno na aktualnom prepodnevu. Upravo je akademik Reiner postavio takvo pitanje, što pokazuje evo i snagu našeg demokratskog sustava, da se takva pitanja također i u Hrvatskoj postavljaju. Mislim da svi zajedno danas smo pokazali da postoji i volja, ali i mogućnost da se u jednoj tolerantnoj atmosferi može otvoriti dijalog. Čini mi se da je zaključak današnje sjednice upravo da je takav dijalog ne samo naše pravo, nego i obveza, da je to potrebno i zbog naših građana, a prvenstveno da u fokusu moraju biti prava djece, a ne naša ideologija ili svjetonazor. Time bih zaključio. Vama, doktorice Reisman, gospodin Tate, zahvalio svima na konstruktivnoj raspravi i zamolio bi sve sudionike da pričekaju sekundu samo da doktorica Reisman može izaći iz dvorane, pa onda kasnije da možemo i svi ostali. Hvala vam puno. Niste htjeli pitanje? Ne?